Good evening. Thank you for attending the August 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. The agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. You may also follow along by connecting to the district's website at www.wcsoh.org. Click on our district link, then select Board of Education, and then Board Docs Agenda, and select this evening's meeting. There will be two opportunities to address the board this evening, the first being Agenda Item 6.01. The first set of public comments is relative to Agenda Items 7.01 through 11.01. Please state the agenda items you are referencing at the beginning of your comments. The second opportunity is Agenda Item 12.01. There is a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Velardo?
Here.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Here.
Mr. Bell?
Here. Agenda item meeting is called to order. Agenda item 2.01, the pledge. Would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving on to Agenda Item 3, District Highlights and Recognitions. There are none this evening. So moving on to Agenda Item 4.01, approve the minutes of the Board of Education meeting held on Monday, August the 9th, 2021, as presented. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion, corrections, addition, changes? Okay, hearing none, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. That motion carries. Moving on to Agenda Item 5, reports this evening. Agenda Item 5.01, the Superintendent's Report. Dr. Kellogg, would you please share with us this evening?
Sure will, President Bell and members of the board. Not a lot to report this evening, just a couple updates as we've gotten now into the school year proper, and excited about that. It's been great. First, I want to talk a little bit about facilities and some updates there where we are. As you know, we've been working on secure entries at Twain, Frost, Charrington, Huber Ridge, and Hamby. It's my understanding, I visited Frost and Huber Ridge today, where we now have passed inspections and have possession of those spaces. So now we're doing punch lists and furniture moving in, and people is bringing their photographs of their family and putting on their desk and all those fun things. So those projects are moving along. I know we still have some additional reviews to go through, some inspections to pass on the other ones to get those ready as well. And those are only affecting the office spaces. The classroom spaces we already have possession of and are using in those spaces. So excited about that. Westerville South, of course, we got entry of that space there. We're still working on the cafe area. We're hearing from construction folks early September, sometime probably after Labor Day would be my guess, that we'll be able to have possession of the cafeteria and get that part going. While we're working on Phase 3, the demo in Phase 3 is already in full tilt, if not done. So we'll have that phase under our belt here as well. So those projects have been impacted by all the obvious pieces that have come during a pandemic with material shortages, manufacturing of equipment, and shortages in the construction industry with enough help. We are still lagging a little bit in some of our technology orders that have gone in, both for the new spaces as well as some of the Chromebook replacements that we've had. So we're just waiting for the manufacturing world to catch up with our demand, so to speak. So excited about that. New Elementary, if you haven't driven by there, of course, it's looking spectacular, roofs on, really starting to take shape, and that's moving along swimmingly. New middle school plans, good place. We'll be finishing up the contract on that one here very soon and start breaking ground here in the next couple of weeks, so looking forward to that. I also today sat in a preliminary planning meeting for Whittier Elementary, where that's the next phase with Whittier and Hawthorne, and was excited to see some of the changes that are being proposed there at this point. So I won't break confidence and tell you what anything looks like yet, because they're still working on it, but it's an exciting project with both. That one will incorporate the renovation piece, also incorporates in the safe, secured entry that we've done at the other building. So those are moving along well. I'm also excited to announce that starting September 2nd or 3rd, we'll begin engaging the whole community, all of the community associated with the school district, in the naming process for the new middle and new elementary school. So we'll have an opportunity for public to participate and share some ideas about naming of those buildings. In the presentation, we'll use our thought exchange tool for collecting some information. There's a precursor to that they'll read through that talks about past practices and some of the parameters we use for naming those buildings that they want to consider. And then as that process ends, we'll bring what seem to be the more popular names back to the board for their consideration moving forward. Behind that, we'll do colors, mascots. Those portions will be done specific to the attendance boundaries of the families that'll be attending. The naming, the whole community owns, right? These mascots and colors, I think, will be more particular to the people who will be attending. So look for that coming out here in early September with emails to folks to participate in that thought exchange. We're excited to get that going. Number two, this is the time of year we spend a lot of time tracking our enrollment for a variety of reasons. Most important, well, now with the change in the state funding formula, the counting of our students becomes even more critical as we're off the cap, and it is a per pupil amount now, whereas before we were counting students that they weren't funding. So those counts will be important. And starting to get that data, there's always a lag. It's amazing the number of students that withdraw or enter over the summer months. And there's always a lag in the data transfer as we wait for records from other schools that they share with us for students who have enrolled with us, and we wait for their requests for records from us to go to them so that they can enroll them and we can take them off our roll. So that settling takes a couple weeks into the school year. So sometime in early October, we'll have a better handle on where our enrollment is moving forward. So getting that one in place is important too. In terms of health and safety and operations and where we are with COVID, we continue to use our data sets from the CDC and Ohio Department of Health. Good news is, at least as I was looking this morning, I have to check again because the weekend lag always impacts the data. Whereas the numbers had been rising up pretty quickly, particularly in the per 100,000 count, last couple of days they seem to be slowing down in terms of that trajectory, but still in that high transmission category. Both counties, somewhere around 150 per 100,000 when I checked this morning. I haven't checked this afternoon. Positivity rates seem to be leveling out. So, and more good news on the horizon as we're hearing with the FDA giving full approval to one of the vaccines moving forward. So we continue to see across the state and locally kind of a stagnant percentage of people have been vaccinated, which is impacting some of that data. So we continue using that. Our COVID-19, the other data we use is the CATS data, which stands for COVID-19 Analytics and Target Surveillance Tool. That's a tool that was created out of Ohio State's Office of Public Health. They are working with the health department to coordinate the data sharing agreement so that the data from the county health department can get uploaded into their site. That gives us data at school boundary level. That's very helpful. We couple that with attendance data as well. So we're still waiting on the wheels of bureaucracy to move that forward so we can get that posted. Once we have that tool ready, we will post that on our website for people to look at. The other one people have an interest in is our tracking of data like we've done in the past with positive cases and quarantines, et cetera, that we've done in the past. We're back up doing that. We really want to make sure our systems of reporting are in place. We're not required to do what we did last year with a outward-facing page. We will look at doing that public reporting in the future. We really want to make sure our systems of reporting are clean, that the data is accurate and reliable for the public to see. So it probably won't be a case where we're posting updates every day, but some kind of sequence where we update on a periodic basis, knowing the accuracy. So right now, the numbers are pretty good. What we're doing right now seems to be holding water, and we're in pretty good shape. So we will make all those tools available for public to look at here in the near future as we get that data. I just don't want to start putting out our data prematurely and inaccurately for folks. I also feel that you really need more than a 2-week cycle of data collection, because as you know, people come on to the quarantine roll and positive roll and come off that roll on a sequential basis over 2 weeks. So you do a 2-week cycle and then another 2-week cycle, you're probably starting to get an idea whether the data is trajectorying in some form or fashion or just kind of hovering around a certain level. So we want to see that as well. Of course, we continue our weekly meetings with both health departments on a regular basis, and we have an internal review team that's looking at district operations, so we consider outside entities, what are we doing with volunteers, et cetera, and keep reviewing that with feedback from our schools about what's impacting their operations and what they want to move. I know, for example, was a conversation today with the high schools and students about homecoming and what might we want to look at there. So we're continuing those. The next one I want to hit on is one that's on national scale. It's transportation. There was a recent news report on this. We talked about it last year. We are struggling, like lots of industries are struggling to get employees, particularly in transportation. It is not a COVID-related issue with quarantines and positive cases. It is just a worker shortage issue. My understanding was we run about 100 routes total per day, and we have 3 substitute drivers right now. So we're always on this thin ice of not having enough drivers. We have internally some of our administrative folks who normally wouldn't be driving, who pick up the slack and start driving for us when we need to. They're doing a lot of that. We are looking at solutions that allow us to keep operations going, but may make it necessary to stagger start and end times, particularly at the elementary level. So we're going to look at that plan of action, review it, and then if we need to use that as here's what we'll do in case of, we'll pull that out. You may recall last year when we had remote opportunities, we had a cycle like that where we would move schools to remote for a day so we could cover transportation. I prefer not to do that. I prefer to keep all kids in and stagger some start and end times so that they get a full school day. I know that's much more challenging for families when all of a sudden, your school's an hour later, one end or the other. But we're going to do our best to make sure we can get all kids in each and every day to the best of our ability. So continuing to look for solutions in the transportation side. And we see it in other parts of our work, aides, cafeteria recess aides, substitute teachers. So if there's anybody out there looking for, in this gig economy, looking for some gig work, we have some good gig work if you're interested in doing that. Transportation's doing the best they can with the resources they have, and we will build out solutions for what to do if and make it as palatable as possible. But I did want to share that. And last one is, on top of all that, we do have kids back in classrooms and teachers back in classrooms. And we're getting back to our core business of teaching and learning. Next to that, of course, we're all aware of the impact the last several months have had on students' learning and the social emotional well-being. Those are baked into what we're doing moving forward as we use the additional funds that have been provided to us so that we can take care of what we like to call unfinished learning. We have some of that to take care of, as well as addressing students' wellness needs, particularly, as we're reminded, there are kids who, in March of 20, when we closed, left the building, may have gone virtual academy all of last year. And so this was their first foray back into school. And that might have also occurred at a time period in which they transitioned from middle to high school or elementary to middle. And so we know that their entry back in is challenging, and they don't have those relationships that they're used to having, both with friends and with staff. And so a lot of emphasis has been on, again, that what I like to say, start with how you're doing, not open your books. But we have put resources in place. We continue to monitor that, have conversations with kids and our staff, and getting back to teaching and learning, which is really what we're here for. So I've been very proud of and humbled by the efforts of our staff across the board this year to get things up and running, to take care of kids, take care of each other has been a part of it. And couldn't be prouder of the people we work with and their care for kids each and every day, and their forward thinking about what we need to do. So happy to answer any questions the board might have, but that's kind of an update on where we're at facilities, enrollment, what we're doing with health and safety, transportation, and then our core business, teaching and learning. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
John, just one quick question. You talked about Staggered Start because of transportation. I'm just wondering, time-wise, what that would look like, if you have any idea, and will that impact teachers and staff? Or how will that impact our teachers and staff?
So the assumption being some kind of staggered start where some of our elementaries start later and end later than others, so we can stagger the routes. So yes, it would impact staff as well. We've already been in contact with Rhonda Gilpin from WA to let her know what we're looking at. We'll include her in those conversations. The actual amount of time yet, I think they're starting to pencil that and what would it be. And our transportation folks are really conscientious about what does that mean to families. I know they'll build that in, but it's still kind of in the pencil planning phase. So I've asked them to get us something here quickly, because it appears that just the right number of people being out, and we're gonna be seeing double backs, meaning a bus has to run 2 routes for the same school, which delays things, which means coverage for those kids. We just don't leave them hanging. We have to keep them covered and taken care of. So it does impact our staff, and we're always appreciative of their efforts to support us when we need to do that. So we do know that's the case. And we have, routes that are experiencing that now.
Kind of to go with that issue, the transportation issue, do you know how much notice families can expect to receive
That's a tricky one, right?
before that
Because,
call gets made?
we might think we're okay at 9 o'clock the night before, and then 2 drivers call in at 4:30 or 5 in the morning to say, can't make it, and boom, we're in that space. So we will always err on caution to give families a heads up as much as possible. But I would like to believe that as no later than the night before we can give notice, but it's just hard to promise that, because we might think we're fine, and boom, something happens and we're down and out. So we want to have the plan in place, share that with families with the understanding that this might come, and I apologize ahead of time, it may be short notice. So with that in mind, whatever planning you as a family might need to do in response to that, at least it would be some sense of consistency about which buildings and which children would be affected by that decision, so that they could have their plan B for what will my family do if that happens.
Thank you.
Yeah, you actually just answered that. I was going to say, if the plan's ahead of time, if the plans are created ahead of time, and it gets out to the families and staff and students, okay, if this happens, these schools will be on cycle A. You will start at just as much time as they can get. The other thing I thought about, and I'm not even asking for any particular numbers, but you mentioned that's a very interesting a reality to be aware of, that there's a core of students that in March 2020, so went online, might have done WVA all last year, and then coming back in person the first time this year. And you know who I thought of was those students that went from elementary to middle during that time, and the ones who went from middle to high school. So like they lost the end of middle, elementary, middle, or and I just thought, I don't know if that's a trackable thing, wow, we really got to keep an eye on supporting those kids. And I have heard, just so you know, I have heard parents say, not 1,000, I've just talked to some, say the teachers have been really supportive of my student. That like that's the conversation they've mostly had, been supportive of my students. So I affirm that.
Well, you've hit on the things that I was going to ask you about. Both of the things I wanted to talk about had to do with families. I think one of the things that I'm seeing, and I'm hearing the same thing you are, Rick, from people talking about their students and the staff, and especially at those transition points, that's really tough. So we have, I think, some good, really good staff members working with those kids. But I worry about the families, because that transition that their kids have had to make is also a transition that's sometimes tough for parents. And, some of the things that I hear from parents suggest, a sense of loss in some ways as they have faced that transition, especially if it's their first one. And how we help our parents through that, because our parents often have had that connection to the schools disrupted too. And how do we reconnect in that way? Because the onus is, in many ways, on us to help restore that connection that we once had. Because, without that connection, messages don't get through, relationships don't flourish the way we want them to, rumors get out of control, all sorts of things happen because the connections are no longer there. I struggle with that for our families, so anything that we can do as we work through what we're doing for our kids, as we think about our communications with families and the relationships with families at the school level, is always important, and our people are really working hard at that. And then, of course, the other thing was, whatever communication we can get out saying, watch for this on the transportation piece is going to be key, and to reiterate that on and on, so that it doesn't get lost in the email chains.
I should mention, because it would be worth the question of, well, why elementary? Why don't you make the changes at middle school, high school? They're older, they can manage it. But you have to remember, we run 14 elementary schools plus the magnet schools, and so the number of routes and the number of children riding is a much more complicated piece. It occupies more of the resources for a longer span of time, which is why that's where we have to make the adjustments, not at middle and high school, particularly high school, where 3 high schools, a vast majority of the student population is ride the bus. So that's where that's where the biggest challenge is. And so when we get past the elementary, then there's usually not issues with middle and high school. So that's why it's it's awkward, because you're applying it to the population of kids that are least able to manage being home alone than the older kids. But that's where it comes from.
Dr. Kellogg, just a quick question about quarantines, right? And I know there's lots of details about the procedures and protocols about that, but just in a general way, can you talk about any changes, about, how that's changed from last year, the way we quarantine students, or what sort of triggers a quarantine, so that families are aware?
There really aren't notable changes in the conditions under which someone is subject to quarantine. There is more allowance for schools if a student is vaccinated and interested in sharing that with us in case of a close contact. We need parent permission in order to determine that. So we have a process in place where if a student is deemed to be in close contact, we can ask the question, and they're able to let us do that, and that changes the quarantine status. The other one, obviously, is that the allowance for in-school 3 feet with masks minimizes the need for the kinds of quarantines we have. The two areas where we are subject to more potential is lunch, because kids take their mask off to eat, although not a criticism, just an observation. Lots of kids seem to eat in less than 15 minutes. I don't, so maybe that helps. And then the athletic activities, both indoor and outdoor, where the mask comes off. That's where we see it. And I would say, as I look through our preliminary data, the vast majority of COVID-related responses we've had to have, someone's positive or quarantine, et cetera, is related to things that are outside of what's happening in the school. It's not happening in school because the mitigation strategies we have in place are curtailing the need for quarantines and transmission of the virus. What we're seeing is things happen elsewhere, aside from lunch, athletics, elsewhere, that are causing those quarantines. And that's part of what we want to get more data under our belt before we make assumptions about what's going on and talk to the community about it. Does that answer?
Yeah, great, thank you. I think it's just, it's a difference now, right, with the 3 feet and with vaccines, and there's some other pieces that affect, the impact a student's potential quarantine if they're deemed to be in close contact. So thanks for walking through that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kellogg. Moving on to Agenda Item 6, Public Comments, Agenda Item 6.01. There are no public comments for this particular section. Moving on to Agenda Item 7, 7.01, Financials. Approve the financial report and investments for June and July 2021. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved?
Second?
Ms. Marshall, would you talk to us about the financials?
Yes, thank you, President Bell, members of the board. So we have 2 months. We had one very short meeting in July and didn't have a second meeting. So we're going over the fiscal year end, June 30, I should say fiscal year and month end, June 30, 2021, and also the beginning of the fiscal year, the month of July of 2021. So for June 30, the general fund had year-to-date receipts of $196.7 million, year-to-date expenditures of $183.3 million, and we ended with an unencumbered general fund balance of $140 million. All funds year-to-date receipts ended at $264.9 million, and year-to-date expenditures for all funds ended at $277.8 million. We had an unencumbered fund balance for all funds of $257.5 million to end the fiscal year. Also included with June's financial report, we have our annual commercial paper report. So under state law, we're required to report that annually to the board. These reports just list our commercial paper that we invested in during the fiscal year and the amount of earned income. So we had commercial paper held with the First Commonwealth Bank that we earned $7,658.38 on. And then we also had commercial paper held with U.S. Bank during fiscal year 21 that we earned $164,345.31 on. And then for July's report, and again, it's the beginning of the fiscal year, the first month of the year, July, we had year-to-date receipts of $58.3 million, year-to-date expenditures of $19 million for the general fund. We ended with an unencumbered general fund balance of $169.5 million. And then for all funds, we had year-to-date receipts of $69.4 million and year-to-date expenditures of $27.4 million. And we ended with an unencumbered fund balance for all funds of $288.3 million. And that concludes my report. If there's any questions?
Questions, discussions for Ms. Marshall? Okay, hearing none, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mr. Velarde,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell.
Yes. That motion carries. Moving on to Agenda Item 8, the Personnel Consent Agenda, that is comprised of agenda items 8.01 through 8.12. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Reeves, would you please share with us regarding the Personnel Consent Agenda?
Thank you, and good evening, President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Mrs. Marshall. I'd like to present to you for your consideration tonight's personnel consent agenda. The items in tonight's relatively brief agenda represent mostly our regular items with regard to personnel. However, there are a few items that deserve to be highlighted in the agenda. We have 2 retirements this evening. Greg Mitchell is retiring from his teaching position after 25 years of service to the district. He is currently teaching 4th grade at McVeigh Elementary. And Deborah Weinman is retiring from her position as food service manager at Westerville Central High School after 21 years of service to the district. And if you've not had lunch at Central, it's an outstanding operation. Good food. Together, they represent 46 years of service to the district. Now, as a former social studies teacher, if that were linear, that would take us back from the end of this school year back to the spring of 1976. In the year of our country's bicentennial and the end of the very first school year of the brand new Westerville North High School. So we'd like to thank them for their service. In addition to our regular list of hirings, resignations, changes of assignments, and one-time pays, the board will notice an extended list of classified hirings. Many of those represent our success coaches, which is part of the design of our teaching and learning team's bridge and extended learning plan, which Dr. Kellogg alluded to a little bit earlier today. Of special interest, the board will have for its consideration 2 separate resolutions to approve the extension of dependent coverage for medical, vision, and dental insurance to the age of 26, and to recognize the new federal holiday, Juneteenth, in our board-approved calendar. And if there's any questions from the board, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Questions? Discussion? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Velarde,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Bell.
Yes. That motion carries. Moving on to Agenda Item 9, Old Business. We have received no edits or adjustments to any of the final readings of these policies contained in Agenda Items 9.01 through 9.06. So I'd like to consider them together as a consent agenda item. Is there any objection? Okay, may I have a motion and a second to approve Agenda Items 9.01 through 9.06?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velarde,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell.
Yes. That motion carries. Moving on to Agenda Item 10, which is new business, and we have none for this evening. Moving on to Agenda Item 11, recommended action, standing business. Agenda Item 11.01, donations. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion?
Just as always, a tremendous thank you to the community organizations, to the individuals that just go. This just represents above and beyond President Bell, and I don't speak on behalf of the board. Just for me, that's a tremendous gift that we continue to receive, and we're very grateful to all of you.
You can speak for me this time, Rick.
Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. And with that, the motion carries. Moving on to Agenda Item 12, public comments, Agenda Item 12.1. Please, just a reminder that each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer will be shown on the screens, and Mr. Hershiser will call time when the 5 minutes has elapsed. Please address your comments to the board and not to the audience. Our first speaker for this evening is Mr. Ron Clark.
Highlighted the pages, so it would be easy to follow along.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name's Ron Clark. Could you please raise your hand if you have taken an oath of office? Thank you very much. You haven't taken one?
I'm not elected.
Okay, okay, just asking.
Not in this context.
Okay. So I have a series of questions to ask, which you don't have to answer. The first one is, who did you take your oath to? I guess my question would it be the Franklin County Board or the governor? Maybe the CDC? The Board of Health? Or was it to we the people? I think we know that answer.
Mr. Clark, I don't want to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but will you put your mask back up? It's our policy to, thank you.
Second question. Sorry, got me off track. What's that?
Do they need to answer the first question?
No, I don't think they do.
This is not a question and answer.
Right, this is just a question I have, and they don't have the answer. The second question is, what did you take an oath to? That is found on page 1516, Article 6, paragraph 3. It should be easy to follow along. It says, you shall be bound by oath to support the Constitution. It says that right in the Constitution. The third question is, what do you have permission to do? That's also found in the Constitution. I'm going to rattle off a couple of things here. For instance, on page 1516, Article 6, the second paragraph, it states that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The other thing, it says that any laws made contrary to the Constitution is notwithstanding. And that includes the ORC, the Board of Health, the CDC, all of it. Page 23 of the Ninth Amendment, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase that, certain rights shall not be construed to deny or abridge others retained by the people. In other words, if it is not in the Constitution, you don't have any business touching it. It belongs to us, the people. Page 23, the 10th Amendment, I'm going to kind of paraphrase that. In other words, if it is not written in the U.S. Constitution or the state, it belongs to the people. It says that right in there. So your job is really easy. If you read that book, there's a lot of things you talk about tonight that really ain't in there. Page 26, page 26, the 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment, Section 3, and I'm not saying this. This is coming out of the Constitution, so don't be offended about that, because you guys took an oath to uphold it. It says, in other words, if you take an oath to uphold the Constitution, you stay inside those bounds. When operating outside the bounds, the 14th Amendment states that you, quote, it's not me saying it, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, which is us. Basically, that's not in the Constitution, but it's basically an act of war when you go outside the Constitution. And also in Section 4, in other words, it states, if you engage in insurrection or rebellion, you will receive no financial benefit. That would include your health care and your retirement. Okay, so this is more directed to you, the people. What's that?
Sorry, your time is up. Thank you for coming this evening.
Okay, but I do have literature on how to hold public officials accountable if you guys are interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Meta Han.
President Bell, board members, and Dr. Kellogg. As I'm sure you now know, most of the language that made up the Parents' Right to Know Act, also called House Bill 240, was added and passed into law by the 2021 biennium budget bill, was not line item vetoed by Governor Mike DeWine, and is now the law. Language passed in the budget states that districts or schools choosing to offer instruction not specified in the Ohio Revised Code on health education, specifically venereal disease and sexual education, shall notify parents and guardians of the instruction, including the name of any instructor, vendor name if applicable, and the name of the curriculum being used. Specified instruction requirements for health education that preceded the Parents' Right to Know Act demand that lessons stress that students should abstain from sexual activity until after marriage, teach the potential physical, psychological, emotional, and social side effects of participating in sexual activity outside of marriage, teach that conceiving children out of wedlock is likely to have harmful consequences for the child's parents, and society, stress that sexually transmitted diseases are serious and possible hazards of sexual activity, advise students of the laws pertaining to the financial responsibility of parents to children born in and out of wedlock, advise students of the circumstances under which it is criminal to have sexual contact with a person under the age of 16, emphasize adoption as an option for unintended pregnancies. The Parents' Right to Know Act aimed at enforcing instruction requirements listed above, as well as requiring parents and guardians to pre-approve teaching that goes outside the letter of the law. Under the new law passed in the budget, schools and school boards are not only required to forewarn parents and guardians of venereal disease and sexual education instruction that goes beyond the scope of the law, schools and boards are also required upon request to provide a parent or guardian of a student the materials pertaining to that instruction. Additionally, the State Board of Education may not adopt a separate model for health education, and the Ohio Department of Education will conduct an annual audit of each school district to check for compliance with instruction requirements. Those audit findings are to be posted prominently on the Ohio Department of Education website no more than 120 days following the beginning of the school year. I am so happy that this bill was signed by Governor Mike DeWine.
Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is Kathy Bowler.
Good evening, President Bell, members of the board, and Superintendent Kellogg. Hello, I'm Kathy Bowler, a 25-year resident of Westerville, taxpayer, and the proud parent of 3 students in the district. We have a wonderful school system, and I've always been a supporter of our district and proud to live in this community. However, I'm increasingly frustrated that this board, elected to represent me and all the parents of the district, continue to ignore our voices on the matter of parent choice. I've written each of you expressing my deep concern for the mask requirement and ask that you recognize parents' right to manage the health and welfare of their children. It is a right I take very seriously. There are documented and detrimental effects of masks on children. Language and communication are impacted. Relationships and mental health are impacted. Why have teen suicide attempts risen by 50% during COVID? My strong belief is that parents must be allowed to weigh the pros and cons and make the decision, not have it forced on us by the board. We are the ones who will help our students deal with the negative impacts of masks. I'm not against masks. I respect the right of other parents to decide what's best for the health and welfare of their own children. But you have completely taken that right away from me by mandating masks. Why is it that the area Catholic schools have masks optional? Why have surrounding districts like New Albany, Big Walnut, and Upper Arlington made masks optional? Why have Dublin, Olentangy, Worthington, and Gahanna, recognized that one-size-fits-all solution is not applicable? I'll tell you why, because they recognize that parents must have the right to decide what's best. I'm asking for the district to recognize the rights of parents and amend its position on masks. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Laura Eichen.
Good evening, members, Board of Education, and Dr. Kellogg. Courage is contagious.
I'm going to need you to keep
bold.
your mask up.
I understand. Be bold and brave with facts. I fight with facts, evidence, and knowledge.
Just a moment.
We are fighting.
Thank you.
I want my time back if you keep interrupting me. I'm 3 feet away. We are fighting against the teachers' union, a violent and aggressive minority. This is American Marxist movement. This is a 24/7 revolutionary movement that is trying to take over us locally, in our school boards, and in our classrooms, our border, in our country. We did not vote this in, and we must protect our children. I am fighting for my future, my children's future, and my grandchildren's futures and their children, and it just goes on and on. My name is Laura Eichen. I represent the group Moms for Liberty, Delaware County. We stand against government overreach and intimidation tactics. We promote teaching the principles of liberty in our homes. I love America. It is the greatest place on earth. We are so blessed to have the Declaration of Independence in the Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I will never give up my God-given rights. I'm a taxpayer, and I have a right to speak about indoctrination that's taking place at the teachers' union and in our classrooms. We have a right to say what is being taught to our children and exposing what's happening in our school districts. People say there is no CRT here. You're wrong. It's everywhere. It's in the teachings of race and equity studies and the hiring of an equity coordinator. Within the first week of 8th grade history, a student already had their teacher talking about equity, diversity, and asking if any of them had marched in a BLM protest. The teacher said, "I would have done this if I were your age." The teacher also stated, same teacher from Genoa Middle School, that he is working with an Otterbein professor about equity and global warming. A good teacher teaches the facts and does not express personal political views. You are paid to teach my child, not indoctrinate them. On another note, in Mr. Dave Christie's American Government class at Westerville Central High School, the students were forced to take a series of quizzes discussing homosexuality and racial discrimination. I have screenshots right here of this. The student did not feel comfortable answering the questions. The teacher failed them. Right here. Political typology quiz. Homosexuality should be accepted by society, or homosexuality should be discouraged by society. It's interesting. Political typology quiz. Racial discrimination is the main reason why many black people can't get ahead these days, or black people who can't go ahead in this, or black people who can't get ahead in this country are mostly responsible for their own conditions. I reviewed the description of American government in the Ohio's learning standards. I printed them out from the Ohio Department of Education. And to my knowledge, it says students examine the founding documents which form the basis of the United States of America and how the American people govern themselves at national, state, local levels. It discusses the supreme law of the land, the U.S. Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Nowhere does it talk about discrimination or race, CRT. One more thing, I'll be quick. On March 11th, 2021, the American Rescue Plan was signed into law. This law gave us $122 billion of the money allocated for state education agencies and school districts. This is called the ARP-ESSER. I'd go through it, I don't have time. Safe return to in-person and continuity of services plan till September 30th, 2023. Thank you. God bless you guys. God bless all of you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, last name is Herbert.
Good evening. I am Satin Herbert. I'm a mother of 3, and I live here in the district. My children go to this district. I had something prepared, and then I had to hear and sit through what we all just heard, and that is the reason why I'm standing here today. As we heard, we're worried about homosexual children learning about homosexuality. My son, he does absolutely identify, he's non-conforming, he's bisexual. That is not something that we need to argue here. It is not something that we need to argue in schools either. Our children deserve to be comfortable in their place of schooling. They don't care about what us adults are pushing on them, and they don't care about race, sexual identity, gender, any of that, unless they learn it in the home. So once I pull this up, gosh, I'm frustrated. I would like to address the board regarding recent issues regarding schools, as well as our overall actions in order to improve diversity, inclusion, and equity across our buildings. My children grew up in this school district and deserve to feel comfortable. Recent events, specifically
at Walnut Springs Middle School regarding racial statements and threats have made this an urgent issue. On August 18th, you guys know when school started. You guys know when school started. A child came to school and is permitted in school, and Dr. Kellogg, we have talked about this, to wear political apparel. I don't care what anybody believes in, what you align to as far as political parties, but tell me why a 13-year-old child is wearing political wear to school. They cannot vote. They can obviously pay attention and form their own ideas, but why is that allowed in these schools? It's twofold. It makes the child a target to those who believe opposite, or that their parents believe opposite, and then it also takes all the minority students, the students that do identify differently as far as sexuality, and it makes them uncomfortable. This specific child who was permitted to wear this apparel within the school was witnessed by multiple students between periods using a racial slur and threatening to produce violent harm to all of the children of color within the school. This was not anything that the school wanted to hear or get out. My child came home upset. He said, "Mom, they suspended the kid that put hands on the child. That's fine, I do not condone violence." Okay, but that child was allowed to go to school for 2 more days. 2 more days. I reached out to Dr. Kellogg. I reached out to every administrative professional within the building, and I was told it was a rumor. Unfortunately, there is a video. Unfortunately, there is a video. The child who took the video, suspended before the child who instigated it. Where is our equity? I sat on the parent equity board last year for Walnut Springs. Through the whole pandemic, we talked about what we were going to do to change the fact that Black students, students of color, are actually experiencing punishment at harsher levels. They do not receive the intervention that white students are, and to tell me that it's a rumor when it is on video, that is showing our children that we do not care about protecting them and making them comfortable in their own spaces. And it is unacceptable. So I want to know what the district is going to do regarding equity. I don't care about your press releases. I don't care about what you say to the media. How are you going to show all of our children, who are all different and deserve to be recognized that way, that we care for them and that we are here to make their days better? They deserve it, and you all deserve. This is your last opportunity, because I'm going to yell. I'm going to yell. This is our last opportunity to show our kids that we actually care. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing on with this evening's agenda, agenda item 13 are board comments. Who would like to go first? Anyone? Started this, and Mr. Villardo.
You know, I'm going to ask you to stop starting with me, brother. Thank all of you for coming and speaking to us. This is, and it was stated earlier, it's not so much a time of kind of questions and answers, but I guess it's a matter of you believing us or not, but we take all of these comments very seriously, and it's painful to hear when kids are wounded.
Please.
So I would say,
Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to please be quiet. Thank you.
so I'd say really thank you for coming out and speaking. It is painful when a student is belittled or feel like they're put in a corner over any kind of issue. I value when people come and speak to us, even if I disagree with them. And I think we are trying to hear and trying to make the best decisions we can for all the students, not just individual sections. I think President Bell, that's all I'll add for right now. May come back to me. Thank you.
Ms. Davidson. Okay. Ms. Altman?
Sure. Excuse me. So there's a lot of tough stuff going on in our society today, and we heard about a lot of it tonight. And there are not easy answers to any of this. We've got different opinions in this room. And it is, believe it or not, it is helpful for us to hear them all. I think you'll understand that we're in a position where you can't make everybody happy, but you listen anyway and you do your best. And so in this context of lots of really difficult things going on, lots of tough things for kids, some of which we heard about tonight, all I can say is that I personally promise to hear you. My kids are in school. My kids bring some of this stuff home too. And, you know, we work with our administration. We set policy. We listen to you. We try to take that and digest all of that information and think about how state law, federal law, the needs of children, the needs of staff, the needs of family members, and our obligations fit together with what happens in school every day, with policy, and with our role as board members. So that's what we can do, and everybody's not going to like all of it always, but I appreciate, I really do, hearing your perspectives and know that even if I vote for something that is maybe contrary to what you would hope, I have heard you and weighed all of those things in the balance. Thanks.
It's difficult to sum up in a few sentences thoughts about the variety of comments that were made this evening. As Jen said, they are topics that are widespread across our country. And it is not a surprise to see them here. These are discussions for America as well as for Westerville City Schools. I would point out a couple of things that probably won't make anybody happy, but that's just the way, unfortunately, I talk about things. It's really important to take a look at the policies that the board has enacted. Jen was talking about that being a significant portion of our role. It is. Our policies provide the governance structure for the district. Our policies come from a multitude of sources. They come from law. They come from both federal law and state law. They come from the Ohio Department of Education sometimes, and they are informed by what we can do locally. I often talk about Westervilleizing our policies insofar as we can. We are governed by law. We are governed not only by the federal Constitution, but also by those powers reserved for the states. Education is predominantly a power reserved for the states. And as such, as an entity within the state, we are governed by the laws placed on us by the state regarding education. That doesn't mean that there aren't federal laws regarding education that we are bound by as well. We certainly are. But education is still predominantly a function of the states. It doesn't mean that individual school districts, as subdivisions in the state, are permitted to choose which laws they will and will not enforce. We do take very seriously issues related to law and how those do and do not balance with what we believe our community wishes to do. And therein lies the balancing act that all boards of education, city councils, all local governing authorities wrestle with. And it does matter to us to hear what people come to say, even people who are angry, even people who are frustrated, even people who come sometimes and cry, even people who come just to say things are going well. All of that matters because it all goes into the formulation and the implementation of governance in this particular school district. Some of the things that have been talked about across the community since school started, and heavily on social media, make me cringe. They often operate from a standpoint that isn't necessarily based on solid information. It is one thing to be upset or angry or happy about something that has a solid basis in fact. It is another thing altogether to be angry or frustrated because of the rumor mill. And I am urging everyone to take a deep breath. If there are questions, do as you've heard some people say, turn to the administrator at your building, turn to your teachers, turn to the superintendent, turn to us, and ask what's going on. Then there's a really good basis to talk about the governance issues. There's also a really good way then to open up those lines of communication with the buildings. All of us on the board have family members in our schools. Everything that affects our schools affects us, just as it affects you. We do not live or operate in some kind of rarefied vacuum where the governance we engage in doesn't even impact us. It does. So my primary ask this evening is to read the policies, understand where the powers are and are not, understand how the governance works when it doesn't, and then to begin to ask some questions so that we all can talk together, because that is where the true local power lies. Thank you.
So as I look out in the audience and I hear and see the frustration, I want to share that when we make decisions, that we model for our students. And the decisions about masks that were made are to keep our kids safe. So when you sit in the audience and you act as if it's not important, there are children here and they see you. So I want you to know that. That is the first thing. Second thing, we are here because we are here about our kids and moving forward. And some of the things you talked about tonight, John, there was one thing that I wrote down. Homecoming, these important milestones that, quite frankly, the kids don't care about the masks, just so you know. They don't care. They just want to be in school and they want normal activities. That's it. And they want to be safe. So to the mother in the back at middle school, I am deeply sorry. I am deeply sorry. I would just stress again to our administrators, which I know that you are, to please be creative and let's make these milestones amazing.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. I would like to just add to what has already been said, that comments, public comments are absolutely heard by us. It's an important aspect of our work as members of the Board of Education, which is why it continues to be a part of our agenda, because hearing from the members of our community is important. It's also important, I believe, for us to understand that our opinion is not necessarily the opinion of everyone. And so we listen, we hear, and we decide based upon what we believe to be in the best interest of all of the children and the families of the Westerville City School District. So we thank you for coming and participating and allowing us to hear your positions, your thoughts, and your experiences here in Westerville City School District.
President Bell, before you close, could I, too quick?
Sure.
So I want to provide some specific responses to some of the specific pieces. First of all, in terms of the concerns related to the quiz that was referenced by Ms. Eichen and the teacher comments, we will follow up on that, the political typology quiz. There's a difference between course content and lesson activity. So I have no problem with reviewing. I believe she mentioned it was a teacher at Central, and she mentioned a teacher at Genoa. We'll follow up on that and make sure that our teachers are not engaging in lesson activities that are inconsistent with what we would expect of them. So we'll take a look at that one. There may be an important understanding there. And the second one, in terms of the Walnut Springs incident, I believe we have emailed each other. And so I know that an investigation was done at the school level. I will work with my team to pull all that material forward, and we will sit down here at the district office and give an independent review of that. I believe the video was reviewed by administrators there. Student statements were taken. I've gotten that third hand through my team, but I will personally have that information brought forward, and so our team up here, independent from the school, will take a look at their investigation, make sure it was done thoroughly and appropriately, and remind folks, particularly parents of students, if your child is disciplined in a manner that's inconsistent or that you don't believe is been rightfully done, you do have a right to due process, particularly as it relates to suspension and expulsions, not necessarily detentions, et cetera. But for suspensions and expulsions, there is a due process piece in there that offers parents the rights to move forward to have that independently reviewed. I want to remind them of that. Same thing with our curriculum and any instructional materials that teachers are using. We have policies in place that allow for people to bring that forward rather than coming to a board meeting here. Policies in place for review to consider those complaints as well. And we will always follow up on those board policies in order to be consistent with what's expected of us. So I just want to share that. So I will follow up on those two pieces within our team and make sure that both the instructional activities that were cited and the incident at Walnut Springs were managed correctly. So I'll take that under my wing.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Villardo, was there something else you wanted to?
No, thank you, President Bell.
Okay.
Actually, there's one more thing I'd like to add.
Okay.
This is a request for the superintendent. As I listen to the comments, as I read comments online, as I hear people conversing in the community and with me, it brings to mind our desire to make sure that people have as much information as they can. And it goes back to what I was talking about let's have the facts. In the district, we used to post all of our curriculum online. And as things have tumbled about in the past few years, that's no longer the case. Curriculum is no longer online. And I would like to ask you to work with staff, and I know that you're interested in that sort of transparency as well, so that our curricula is there, or are there for people to look at, so that they can see, what are the expectations in these particular courses, what is actually to be taught here. And it helps to then understand what is curriculum, what are the resources versus curriculum, and it gives us, again, a better place to stand. As we look at the stuff that's going on around the country and we hear the things that are talked about, people often say they don't know what's taught in the schools. We can help make sure that you can't say that in Westerville City Schools. So let's put it out there as best we can, as soon as it is feasible to do so.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 14 on the agenda, dates, times, and locations of the next meeting. The board will meet in regular session on Monday, September the 13th, 2021 at 6 o'clock p.m. at the Early Learning Center located at 936 East Wind Drive, Westerville, Ohio, 43081. Agenda item 15 is executive session. Executive session for the purpose of considering the compensation and employment of a public employee. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second. You can have it.
Okay. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. That motion carries, and the board will move into executive session and then return here for adjournment. Okay, we are returning from executive session, and we'll continue with our agenda. Agenda item 16 is adjournment. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. We are adjourned.